button type of thing. All right, let me share my screen. This is where things are going to get dicey. All right, can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
Audio still good? All right, cool.
Yep.
So React, what is React? You've heard it like called a front-end framework, but it actually, in actuality, it only consists of really only 2 libraries. And the reason why they call it a framework because of just how unique it actually like works. It works in a very specific way. But so calling it a framework, totally okay. But in actuality, it's just a collection of libraries specifically for the front end. So why React though? Like, why are we teaching React? There's a bunch of other front-end JavaScript frameworks. It seemed like several years ago, it seemed like a new one was coming out every few months. There's React, there's Vue.js, which is really popular. There's Angular, there's Svelte. There's also React Native, as Quinn was talking about this morning. But React has really become the most popular, primarily because of it's backed by Facebook, and Facebook's huge, and they've got a lot of resources, a lot of developer resources, so they can keep React up to date, as well as the most jobs out there for developers specific for React. If you're looking for a front-end developer, more often than not, that you're going to be working in React. You can even like Google, I don't even know where to go, like LinkedIn, and then like, I don't know if they have or like Indeed. Like if you type in like React developer, I don't know if it shows up how many jobs there are. But where is it? If I go to like Indeed, like see like React developer, there's like 59,000 jobs. If I like just type in like Angular, I don't know, hopefully there's not more. That'd be funny if there were more. So yeah, less than half for like Angular jobs. Anyway, so React, most in-demand front-end framework. That's why we teach it. We want to put you in the best position to, again, get a job after Code Platoon. Any questions just about React? Any of the other frameworks?
Does React work in conjunction with a lot of backend frameworks as well, pretty easily?
Yeah, so
Spring or Django. So
React is framework agnostic or backend framework agnostic. So it doesn't matter what backend you are running, you can always connect to a React front end. Vue.js is very similar to React. It's almost easier to use than React because it came out after React, and it all the like the not all of it, but a lot of like the what made React painful. Vue.js kind of did all the heavy lifting for us, but it's very similar. So if you know React, learning Vue.js is very easy. So again, where does React fit into the full stack? Where does it fit in? In the past, when we were just doing full stack Django, we'd have our models, our templates, and views. But now when we're dealing with React, we're going to have our models, React in place of our templates, and then our views. Questions on how React is going to be fitting into that? We've kind of discussed that in the past. All right. So the libraries needed in order to get a React application up and running is you really only need 2, but preferably 3. So you need the React library, which is the main React library. There's React DOM, which is a package that provides specific methods to interact with the document object model, essentially interact with the web page. So there's React DOM, and there's an other optional library called the React Scripts. It's optional but highly recommended because it does a lot of the heavy lifting of Webpack and Babel, which you probably haven't heard before, but Webpack and Babel is required when using React. And React Scripts just handles all that for us. Webpack is really annoying, and learning how to configure the Webpack file and the Babel file, it just takes too much. It takes a lot of time that you would just rather spend actually doing development or doing like actual front end design work. All right. So I talked about Webpack and Babel. These are terms you might hear in your career as a full stack developer, but Babel is literally just a file. So if you look up here, .babel.rc, this is what an example Babel file looks like. It's literally just a JavaScript compiler that converts all JavaScript and makes it backwards compatible with browsers. So if you're using, ES16, like the new up-to-date JavaScript, and you're on an older browser that doesn't support the most up-to-date JavaScript, Babel will convert everything down to make sure that browser can work with that new up-to-date JavaScript. Webpack is just a build. All Webpack does is bundle all your assets, like your JavaScript, your images, fonts, CSS, into one bundle file. It's literally just one big ass file of code that looks really dirty and everything. And that's what's actually executing in the browser and actually running your code. And this is what a Webpack config file looks like. It's a lot of weird stuff going on, like the entry point to your JavaScript or to your application, where the bundle.js file exists. So this is what's actually running. You don't have to know what this is, but just know that these are two files that exist when dealing with React. So let's actually go ahead and create a React app from scratch. Questions? Does anybody have any questions? Nope. All right.
I guess I got a little one with regards to Django being the back end. I spoke with one of my buddies who's a software developer, and he said that Django is kind of like fading out right now in terms because it like tries to do too much. So is there something that React is like commonly placed with in terms of, or like a more popular option for the back end?
Not necessarily. Django's still really big. There's Flask, which is a more lighter weight Python backend framework. It's strictly backend. It doesn't really do anything with the front end. So you can have Flask. So if you want to still use Python as the backend, look into Flask. It's so much more lightweight. And you don't have as much control as like Django does. There's also, if you want to learn Node.js, if you just want to work in JavaScript from the front end to the back end, there's Node.js using Express, Sequelize. But if you want to do that, then you have to, Django is essentially like Django's a puzzle that's already kind of built for you. If you want to work in Node and Flask, you have to go out and find those puzzle pieces and bring them together. And you have to make sure that they work together. So that's what the benefit of using Django is that, again, everything's kind of already there for us. Where if you're using Node, which is JavaScript on the back end, you have to use Node. All right, now you have to figure out how to get a backend server up and running. All right, you have to grab Express. All right, now you need to interact with a Postgres database. All right, you have to go out and find an ORM. All right, we're going to use Sequelize, and you have to bring all that together and piece it together yourself.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. So Node is very popular for a backend as well. So is Flask. So is Spring Boot, Ruby on Rails. That's pretty popular, but that's dying. But Python, again, is really the most popular language out there, or if not top 2 or 3. So there is benefits to obviously learning Python from like a career perspective. All right. So I kind of talked about the 3 libraries you need is React, React DOM, and React Scripts. So let's actually go ahead and create a React app from scratch. So I'm in this React from scratch directory. And remember, take us all the way back to, week 1, week 2. How do we initialize a new NPM package or node package? Does anyone remember? How do we get that package.json file?
npm install.
It's not npm install is if you already have an npm JSON or package.json file. How do we create that package.json file? Does anyone remember? It's npm init. If we run npm init, it's going to bring up this command utility that walks us through creating a package.json file. So if we just walk through this and pretty much just do all this, we can do everything as default. And is that okay? Yes. Now we've got that package.json file. And when you do that npx create React app, that package.json file is created for us with all the necessary packages already installed. But again, we're creating a React app from scratch. Questions about this? All right. So what are the 3 libraries
Sorry,
that?
I want to ask a question real quick.
Yep.
So for the npm and then -y that we always use, like that basically does the exact same thing that you just did, right? Where you say enter over and over again.
I'm sorry, say it does what?
Okay, so you see how you just hit you just typed in npm init and then you just kept on hitting enter.
Yep.
So it's the same thing as npm init and then -y, right?
Correct. So yeah, if you do that -y, it just automatically defaults to all the default things. So as before, we only need 3 libraries. We need React, React DOM, and React Scripts. So I'm going to clear the terminal. Now, how do I install React? What's the command for that?
Just the npx create React app, right?
So that's how you actually create a React app. But I just want to install the libraries individually. Does anybody remember how we used to install Jest in React? Or I mean, sorry, just in npm?
Would you use npm install just? So I'm guessing it's probably going to be npm install React.
Yep, just React. So we can npm install React, React DOM, because that's the other library, and React Scripts. So those are the 3 libraries we need to install. And you can read through the documentation, React DOM, and that brings up the React. So React DOM has these 5 different methods on them. And we can go into React Scripts too, but all right. So again, React is a really large library. It's got tens of thousands of files, and it could take a little while to install. So again, we're just doing this from scratch. You're not expected to do this every time. I'm just doing it from scratch just so you can kind of see how to do this, just where it's starting from the very basics. But going forward, we'll redo all this using npx create React app, because that does installs everything for us. Let me bring something up. Anybody have any questions or anything about anything?
I mean, I mean, it's the second day. I know it's just gonna take some getting used to like the syntax and everything, but yeah, it is a pain in the ass just figuring out where things need to go and everything like that. So
Yeah.
I like my questions are too like general because when you watch it happen, you're able to code along and like it's like, oh, okay, that's happening, and then you just draw a blank whenever it's happening.
Whenever, yeah. All right, come on, keep going. So it's taking a little while. Go ahead.
Sorry, is there a reason we're not doing this in a virtual environment?
So yeah, you only need a virtual environment when working with Python. With React, React just doesn't need a virtual environment because it's installing everything within this package, like this package.json. So it's installing everything within like this file. And that's what the node modules are. And so when you push this code up to GitHub, essentially everything's already confined to whatever is in this directory. That's just how React is, and the difference between Python as well. So we don't have to create a virtual environment for when we're dealing with JavaScript or React. All right. So it looks like everything installed. You can see this dependencies key with React, React DOM, and React scripts. So these are the 3 libraries that I installed with the versions of those libraries. And you can see the node modules right here that was also added. Now, inside of the scripts, what's great about React scripts is React scripts already has a bunch of scripts that come with React. So we don't have to do anything. We don't essentially have to write our own scripts. So what I'm going to do is write the script start and run React scripts. I think it's start. I believe it's start. Or is it run? I think it's start. So the only thing I did was install React, React DOM, React scripts, and added this start script so I can run npm. I can either run npm start or npm test, and it'll actually run this package or run this module. All right. Next thing I need to do in order to get this React app up and running, I'm going to create 2 directories called public and another one called source. Does that kind of look familiar with the public and source directory when we do npx create React app? And then inside the public directory, what file is inside the public directory that is like the entry point? Anybody remember? It's the index.html file.
Index.
Yep. And in here, we just have so in our index.html file inside of our React from scratch, I've got here, and our HTML file only has one element in between the body, which is a div, an empty div with an ID. And we can call this whatever we want, but let's call it root. We can call it app. We can call it entry point, whatever we want, but let's just call it root because this is going to be the entry point or the root to our React app. And then inside of our source directory, what's the main file inside of our source directory?
app.js.
There's one file above that.
Index.js.
Index.js. Index.js. And I remember Ankur said yesterday, we're never going to touch our public file, which is correct. So we're only going to be working in our source directory from going forward. So inside of our public, we have this HTML file, and in our source directory, we have this index.js file. So now when I run this, the HTML file is the entry point into our app. That's what's running on our machine. Like, so you can, what you see on the screen. So we need a way to inject or embed our components inside of our HTML file. And we can do that in the index.js file. We need to import a couple of things. We need to import React from React. I actually don't even know if we need to do that. Let's actually not. I just want to see if this works. The only thing we really need to import is React DOM. So import React DOM. Whoop. From React DOM. So we've got React DOM imported. So React DOM is imported or is declared, but its value is never read. Now, if we go over here and read about React DOM, so if you load React from a script tag, use these top level, blah, 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 blah. So here, React DOM package provides DOM specific methods that can be used at the top level of your app, which are at the top level of our app, which is going to be index.js file. As an escape hash to get outside of the React model, if you need, most of your components should not be use this, whatever. So the one we want to use is render. So if we look at the render method, we can say React DOM render. We can render an HTML element or some element or a component or something, as well as where do we want to actually inject that element. So I'm just going to copy this over. Well, I'll just do React DOM.render. And let's render an HTML tag, or what says hello Papa Platoon, as well as where do we want to inject, where do we want to render this HTML tag inside, like where do we want to render it inside of our HTML file? Well, we want to render it in between this div with an ID of root. So we can do document.getElementById root. So what this is saying is this render method, take in some element. It could be an HTML element. It could be a React component, as well as where in the HTML file do you want to inject this code or this content. So if we do that, and I'm clear, and I do npm start. Let's see if I had that script ran correctly. It says, we're unable to detect target browsers. Would you like to add the defaults to your package.json? Why not? Yes. Starting development server. And if everything ran correctly, I get hello code Platoon. So now I've got a React app up and running. And I created this React app totally from scratch, not using the create React app command. What questions do you have about that? Of like what is actually happening? Does that make sense? Does it not make sense?
Good.
Oh, that's good. All right. So typically we don't want to be writing all of our code inside of this single HTML tag. So what we're going to do, I'm going to create another directory or another file called app.js. There it goes. I'm going to bring that over to the left, close out my HTML file. And in here, I'm going to create a app component, a functional component that just renders pretty much the same thing like here. So yeah. So going forward, if you don't already have this installed as a VS Code extension, go into your extensions with it, which is the blocks, and type React snippets. Let's see. React snippets. Is that one installed? Which one do I have installed?
Do you have to use the installed to find it?
Oh, so I already have it installed. Anyway, let's see. Do I even have it? So I've got, it's called React JS code snippets. So I have this installed, but it looks like there's more popular ones out there. Yeah, that's what has 1 million people that's downloaded it. So it's called React JS code snippets. That's just what I have installed, but I'll kind of show you what that does. And it's going to make your life a lot easier. If I wanted to create a functional component called app.js, I'm in my app.js file right now. I can type in RSC. And what this creates, you can kind of see what it creates, a React component without prop types. And you can kind of see what it already does. So if I type in RSC, I can do RSCM. But if I just type in RSC and click enter, it builds out the skeleton of a React component for me. So I don't have to do like, I don't have to like make sure that, like I don't have to create my React component from scratch every time. Questions about that? There's other snippets, RS or RC. I can create a class component. So this is the same thing that I just did, except it's a class component. So I imported React, imported the component. So this is a class component. Yeah, but we're going to be doing functional components. So I'm going to create a functional component called app right here. And in this app component, I'm going to create an H1 tag that just says, hello, Papa Platoon from the app component. So I've got this component app. I'm exporting it. Default, I'm exporting the app component. Now in my index.js file, I'm going to import app from the app directory or app file. So now inside of here, I'm just going to execute or add the app component in there instead of that H1 tag. So I created this app component, have an H1 tag that says hello Papa Platoon from app component. And now I'm importing that app component into my index.js file. And now I'm adding that app inside of that render method, which is going to render this app inside of our root tag right here inside of our HTML. So if I come over here and refresh that, now it says hello Papa Platoon from the app component.
And I just got a quick question, but why is there a space in the app when you're rendering it? You're using the JSX or whatever. It's app space, and then you cut it
Right here?
Yeah, right there.
Because that's just the convention. If I did that, I'm not quite sure. Will it still work? Yeah, it still works, but convention is just add a space there.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions?
I just have a question real quick. So, how would you go about importing this into another project, like the Django project or HTML? I'm assuming that you just import the JS file.
No, so we're gonna get that. Like probably, it's like one of the last things we're gonna do. We're essentially gonna make our Django backend as an API. So if you go to an API endpoint, it'll serve up our backend Django data as JSON. And in here, in our app.js, we're going to have an API folder that has a bunch of routes where we actually go to our Django backend route using the fetch library. So we fetch at a specific API endpoint and we get that data back from the backend server and then serve it up. It's kind of a lot, especially 'cause that's like the last thing we're going to do. All right. Any other questions? All right. So we just created a React app from scratch, but as you know, React does a lot. We can use a individual command to actually do that. And that is the npx create React app command. So I just wanted to show you what it looks like if we were to create a React app from scratch without using the npx create React app command. But going forward, we're going to be using the npx create React app. So I'm inside this intro to React. I'm going to create a new React app from scratch. I'm going to use the npx create React app from scratch. I'm going to call it my app. And it's going to install everything. As it's installing, let's go ahead and talk about some of the main items of React. So we talked about npx create React app followed by the app name. It's very similar to the Django admin start project name. It's pretty much the same type of thing. It's the equivalent of that. So let's talk about Airbnb and why use React specifically. So you should be pretty familiar with these terms: components, props, state, JSX. So components allow us to split the UI into multiple, essentially reusable blocks of code. So think of a component as a function, just because that's what it is. It is a function, and I can call that function anywhere I want in my program. So if you look at this, like here's Airbnb that uses React. What do you think is an individual component, or where is a component that you think is reusable?
All those listings.
I'm sorry, say that again. Kind of. Was that Ty?
Yeah, I think he said all of the listings.
All of these? Yep. So
sorry, I was on the wrong audio.
no, yeah. So pretty much everything's a component in here. So this whole thing is a component, and it looks like it's probably a component that has a bunch of child components. And while we're at it, if you're in the Chrome browser, if you go to extensions and you type, or where is it? Or if you just type in Chrome extensions into Google, and if you go to the Chrome Web Store and you type in React Dev Developer Tools, React Developer Tools will provide you a React plugin or a Chrome extension that tells you what applications or what websites are using React. So if you open that and you can add it to your Chrome browser, you can see what websites use React. And so here I am at Airbnb, and I've got this little React. It says React Developer Tools has access to the site, and it says this page is using the production build of React. And I'm going to open up my developer tools, or open up the console, and along the top, when I install this React Developer Tools Chrome extensions, if I go over to this little double caret and open that, notice I've got this little components and profiler. If I click components, I can highlight, select an element on the page to inspect it. I can inspect the individual components and see their props and state. So if I look up here, like these buttons, each one of these buttons is probably one component. It just has different props passed into it to make it say like anytime, guests, etc. So if I click on that, you can kind of see right here, the props that's being passed in is true. I've got children, chip component, CSS, expanded, false. So here, I'm in a component called with styles, which is a parent component of this button. And if I highlight it, I can see the props that are passed in to here. And it says checked true, expanded false, ID. It's got a function called on press, which does something. And it also says some trailing accessibility text as well. That's another prop. But in this checked, it says checked is true right here, which anytime it's highlighted. If I do checked is false, watch what happens to this anytime, what it looks like. Now it's false. So you can actually mess around with the React components from production, essentially production React applications. So just know that there's the components you can inspect. You can inspect props and state using that Chrome developer, or I'm sorry, the React developer tools. All right, so I've got my app up and running, or I installed everything. So I'm gonna cd into my app and I'm gonna npm start and see if this app gets up and running. Any questions about npx create React app? Everyone's pretty much got that down, right? And now in here, just like I did with Airbnb and inspected the React components, I can inspect here as well. So here's my React app up and running. I can go to components, and there's only one component of this React app because it's super simple. And it really doesn't have any props passed in, and it doesn't have any state. So if I were to open that up, so I'm inside my app.js, I've got my index. Right here, there's my app.js or my app component in here. So if I were to add, let's add some props to this state. So I'm going to say like name equals Tom. So I just added a prop to the app component, and I'm going to add props. So props is being passed down. So now if I go back here and if I refresh, now I've got that name. So I've got the app component highlighted. If I inspect the props, I can see that name prop and the value of that name prop. So this is a way you can kind of debug and like inspect your application of what's being passed down to child components. All right. So again, components are reused pieces of code. Props, components can accept data as props, similar to passing arguments to a function. So just like I am passing props to a function, it's pretty much the same thing. I've got this component, which I'm invoking right here, and I'm passing props into it, almost like I'm passing passing arguments into it. Questions about props? All right. And state is an object that stores data that is local to the component. So state is local to that component. Props are passed down from your parent component. JSX looks just like HTML, but it allows us to write JavaScript very similar to Jinja 2 in Python and in Django. So again, reusable pieces of code. Here's an example. Along the top, we have dates, guess, price, time of day, language. All these are the same component, just invoked multiple times. And the only thing that is changed between these components are the props that are passed into it, such as the title or the label of it, and possibly the function that like the click function that's passed into it. When I click that, it might go to a different location. Same with like this part with the activities, hiking, agriculture, camping. All these are the same component. They just have different props or different state that are passed into it. Same with this component 3, which is that card. These are all the same components, just different props that are passed into it, such as the type of, it's a day trip, guided hike. That's a different prop. All right, so let's inspect component 3 a little bit. So component 3 is a parent component, and that parent component consists of a bunch of child components, such as like the favorite icon, a card image component that literally all it does is display this image, or like the card main component that has like information about this card, and maybe the star rating. That's like an individual component. It's like a small piece of code that its only responsibility is to display the ratings of it and the star rating of it. So you can kind of see component 3 is a parent component, which is this big component. And then it's got the card image component, which is this component. Also the card main component right here. And then the card image and the card main component also have children, such as the favorite icon and the star rating icon. So props is passed down from parent to child. Also, it can go down to grandchild, and you can technically keep passing it down like a tree. You can keep passing props down. Questions on that?
This isn't exactly related to this, but as far as class parents or class components and function components, do they both operate exactly the same?
Yes, just they do. Now there are
So it's
some
just a difference in syntax then.
Yep, exactly. So example, here's component 3 that has that return statement that renders the card and the card image component and the card main component. And then over here is like the card image component, and that will render the favorite icon component. Likewise with the card main, it will render the star rating component. So you can have components that render components that render components. So it's like just this big nested application of components. So we kind of talked about this. There are 2 different types of components. As you just said, there's class-based components and functional-based components. They're essentially the same, except the syntax of how you interact with them are a little bit different. We'll talk about component life cycles later on in the next several days. But essentially there's 3 different events for a component. There's mounting. So when the component first renders to the DOM, renders to the page. There's updating. So maybe when something changes, like the state of that component changes, you can update that component or re-render it. So it like refreshes to the screen. And then unmounting, which is when a component is removed from the screen or like disappears. But we'll cover this later on. All right. Any questions just about components, prop state, all that fun stuff?
How would these files be likely to be organized, with each component with its own page, or would they be some of them on the same page, or just what is the most likely scenario for that?
Let me see something real quick. I'm going to bring up a production. So this is an actual production React application. So you've got the public, you've got the source directory, that's pretty familiar. And now we have a components directory. And inside of our components directory, we have the names of our components. Like we have a date picker. And this isn't always best practice. Every application, every organization you go to will be organize it a little bit differently. So in this case, the date picker, so this is the date picker, has the styling, the CSS in line with it in the same directory. We have a card that has a card component. So this is kind of like, and this is all, you've heard of the Redux. I know Quinn talked about Redux. So this is another part of the React application. So these are just a small, this is kind of like a really small application, the React application of kind of how it would be organized. Do I have any other? Yeah. So yeah, questions about that? Does that make sense? Kind of just like visually kind of seeing.
Yes, thank you.
All right. So now let's actually go ahead and if you want to follow along, feel free to do so, but we're going to create, we're going to go through today's challenges, not challenges, just today's lecture, and we're going to create a mute button. So if I go to Tuesday, if I go all the way down, where is it? So in today's November 23rd, inside of the lesson, if you click on mute button or go to just Code Platoon React mute button, we're going to go ahead and create this from scratch. We're going to create a mute button. When I click it, it's going to toggle for me. See, it looks like I'm going to fork it. So feel free to follow along. All right. So I'm going to git clone React mute button, CD into React. I'm going to open I'm going to open that up into a new VS Code window. And this only has some icons in here. I could have just done this in my other React application, but I'm just going to do it from here. So in here, I'm going to create a new React app called npx create React app and call it just my app again. Does anybody have any questions? about anything?
So when it comes to site design,
And when it comes to site design, then you cut out.
He's
sorry, unmuted the wrong. When it comes
Oh.
to site design, are you pretty much always stacking components next to each other? Like you're always stacking components at the same level for the most part in React, or is it
When you say-
common?
Are you talking about like the file structure or?
I guess
or-
within your JavaScript, is it? Are components frequently nested within each other, or is that not very common?
No, so components are almost always nested within one another. So you'll have a component, like a parent component that calls in the return will render another component. That component will render another component. That component can render another component. So it's going to be very deep. All right. CD into my app. I'm going to start this. So I've got my app. I'm going to bring in the icons. Oh. So these icons right here, they're just SVGs. You can look at what they are, but I'm going to bring them into my source directory. And here we go. So I'm going to open up my app. If I look over here, run that. So you got my edit or my basic React app. I'm going to go ahead and delete all of that. And what should I call this? I'm just going to create an image tag. And I'm going to have that source be some image. And the image I want is going to be this on icon or whatever. So I'm going to import those icons. So import on icon from icons. Let's do it on SVG. So if I do import this on icon, let's see if everything works. So I don't need that logo anymore, the SVG logo. Let's see if everything's working. I have an alt tag, audio on. There we go. So I'm going to create like a mute button when you click mute, just like on your local machine or like on your keyboard. If you click mute, it'll actually say like mute. So if I click like mute, this will like toggle mute on or off. So right here, I have an on icon, which I'm importing from this directory icons, which it comes from the React mute button directory, or from this part. Those are those icons. So I'm importing that on icon right there. And what I want to do is click that and have it switch to this off icon. So if I also imported this off icon like that, and I'm going to display the off icon as well. Audio off. So if I come over here, you can see I've got this audio on off image. And when I click on that image, I want to be able to toggle the image essentially. So let's see. I'm going to just separate this out a little bit more, just so. So just so they're on different lines. And inside the app CSS, I'm going to add padding top, say like 40 pixels. So there we go. So now I've got them on two separate lines, just so you can kind of see them. So what I'm going to do is inside my app state in here, I'm going to have a like is muted, which is going to be a Boolean value to determine whether or not this app should be muted. So what I need to do is I can say import use state from React. And this use state method is the only way I can update the state of this app component. I can't update state directly. And this use state method returns an array of two items, the current state value, as well as it returns a method to update that state value. And we need to name those two variables. So I can do const is muted, which that's going to be the value of that state. This is going to be the state value. I'm sorry, the state variable name. And I'm going to name the method to update the is muted state. I'm going to call it set is muted. And I'm extracting that from the use state method. And the initial value of this is muted state value, I'm going to pass it in this use state method. And is muted is first going to be false. And notice it says is muted is declared, but it's never value is never used. So I'm going to console log is muted just to see what that value looks like. I'm going to call is muted. Yep.
Why is it that we always declare a like state and a function for the state together?
Because you're going to need to like, you don't just want to declare state and never have that change. If you have state that will never change, you just might as well hard code it like in the component. That's why. And this is just the convention. You'll always declare the function, or you'll always name the function that will update the state. So you'll never just have like is muted is false and never do anything with that. Like I don't see ever a scenario where you just want a state value to never change. So you would also have set is muted. And
All right, thank you.
yep. And you can see what set is muted as well. So if we look at that, you can see set is muted is a function. This is what's actually being returned. Dispatch action, fiber queue action. I don't know what any of this means. States updates from the use state and use reducers hook. Yeah. So this is what is being returned is this dispatch action function. All right. So I have this method or this set is muted. Now let's talk about conditional rendering. If I wanted to render is audio on, so if is muted is false, then I'll want to return this audio on image. So inside of here, if I wanted to do some conditional rendering, I can do the curly braces. And in here, I can run like a ternary operator, like is muted. It's taking me. Why is this taking me? Is muted. So if is muted is true, oh man, I want to render this audio on, or no, I'm sorry, if is muted is false. So if I want to do the opposite, so the opposite of is muted, which would be true, I want to render the audio image is on, else that means the audio is off. So if I run that and go back to here, you can see that the audio is on because the is muted, its initial value is false. So if is muted is false, it comes down to this return statement. I'm running JavaScript in here. So the opposite is muted, which is current value is false. So that bang is muted. That means if this is true, or if this value is true, which is it is, render this, the audio on. If it's going to be false, render that. So I can also test that by running true, just to see if that works. And if I come over here, now you see that it's lined out. All right. Any questions about that?
I want to know, is it possible for you to do the same thing but with an if statement rather than the
So that's the thing you can't do. You can't just write any old JavaScript in here. It's kind of annoying. You can only do certain JavaScript. Like you can't do like, why is this tape? I can't do like a for loop. I can't just type in, like I can't execute for loops in here like this, but I can do like for each in here if I wanted to, or map in here. I can use those type of functions inside of JSX. So I can't do an if statement directly within JSX. And that's why I use a ternary operator, because ternary operators I'm allowed to use. So just keep that in mind. Like if you try to run like a for loop or some other kind of JavaScript inside of here and it's not working, it's because it doesn't accept that type of JavaScript.
All right. But you could write it in like a different component or something like that, and then apply that, or no?
You can write that if statement in a separate function. And in here, you can run that for loop and do it in there and then execute that function inside of here. You can do that way. So that's one way around it. But yeah. So I've got this is muted, but now I want a button to, or not a button. I just want to be able to, when I clicked this div or this image, I want to be able to toggle it between the off icon and the on icon. So I'm going to create a method called const toggle mute. And this function just returns, or sorry, it doesn't return anything. It just set is muted to is muted, or the opposite of is muted. So this toggle mute function just sets is muted to the opposite of whatever is muted is. So if is muted current value is false, The opposite of it with that bang is true. So it sets it to true. If is muted is true, the opposite of true is false. So it sets that is muted to false. So on here, I can run an on click handler and execute the toggle mute button. And I can also add that same thing down here because I need each one in here. And in here, I'm just going to console log clicked like so. So if I refresh that, nothing's showing up. See how it says clicked, and now it toggles it. There's also, let's see, an easier way I can do this as well. There's multiple ways I can do this. Maybe I just got rid of that whole thing. Let's just only have, so there's different areas in here where I can actually do this ternary operator. So I'm doing it in here, but maybe I want to get rid of, whoop. And maybe I'll do the ternary operator with inside of, because again, inside of the curly braces, I can run JavaScript in here. So maybe I can say, my keyboard's is muted. So if is muted is false, so let's do the opposite. I'm going to display the on icon, else display that. I'm just changing the alt tag to just audio icon. So I can do that and the same thing still works. Now it's just less code. So I've got this app.js. I've got the icons, but now let's actually, this app.js is like the main part of our application, but we want to extract this mute icon or whatever it is, this mute functionality outside of the app into its own component. So inside the source directory, I'm going to create a components directory. And inside the components directory, I'm going to create a buttons directory. And inside that buttons, I'm going to create a mute button.js file. And this is where my mute button is actually going to exist. So I've got React code snippets. I'm going to RCS, create my mute button component super easily. I'm going to bring this code where it has the image and everything over. Actually, I'm going to like so. Let's just start fresh again. So if I'm moving everything over here, clicked. So I moved the off icon. So that means I'm no longer using the on icon and off icon inside the app.js. I need to import them inside of the mute button. So I need to go, I'm not quite sure how I need to get there. Buttons, I need to go up another level. I need to go to icons, on icon. So I've got this mute button component. Now I need to import that into my app.js. So I can say import mute button. And look at it, automatically kind of imported it for me. So down here, I'm going to declare the mute button. And let's just see what shows up. So if I come over here, I've got the audio off and I've got this click right here. And that's because in this mute button, I'm running this console log clicked and I'm only displaying the off icon. But all my state is up in my app.js. So if I want to control everything from the app.js file, I'm going to have to pass down is muted as well as this toggle mute function down as a property to my mute button. So in my mute button, in order to pass it down props, I can say is muted and I can call this whatever I want. I'm just calling it the same as this is muted just to keep things simple. And so I don't make mistakes, as well as toggle mute. I'm going to toggle this mute down here. So what I'm doing, I'm passing in toggle mute down as a prop to the my button component. And this toggle mute updates the state of the app.js component. So what I'm going to end up doing is clicking this toggle mute function inside the mute button, and it's going to update its parent state. So the toggle mute button is in the parent component app.js. I'm passing that toggle mute button down as a property to its child component, which is the mute button component. And that mute button component is where I'm going to actually do the on click event handler. So I'm going to click it. And then that function is going to update the state of the parent component. So just like I did up there, I'm going to need to pass down the props. And let's actually just inspect the props. So console log props. If I do props like so, if I come over here and refresh it, here are my props inside the mute button component. Got this is muted false, and it has this toggle mute function. And that is coming from right here, toggle mute and is muted. I can call this anything, something else. And if I save it, these are now keys on that props. So if I come over here, you can see now what the props are, anything and something else, where it was originally is muted and toggle mute. All right, so now I have the toggle mute prop and the is muted. I went back to what they originally called them. And now I'm going to call props toggle mute. And here I can do props is muted on icon, else have it be the off icon. So in here, I'm taking the props. Here's that toggle mute. And now let's see if I actually, so there's my props. If I click that, is muted so it's now true. Let's see. So if that would be wrong. So I need to do the opposite of that. So if I refresh, so I'm passing down, again, I'm passing down the toggle mute function to my child component as a property. And so I've got props right here. When I click on click, I'm running props.toggle mute, which is then executing this function, toggle mute, which is console logging clicked, and then it's updating the state of the parent component is muted to now true and false, vice versa. You can kind of see what those values are every time I update it. And the reason why props is showing up here, every time I click that, what's happening is it's updating the state from the parent component. Anytime the parent component updates, every time the state updates, it re-renders, which ultimately re-renders the mute component or mute button component as well, which then console logs this again. So that's why you keep seeing that console log every time I press it, because it's re-rendering. There you go. If you didn't want this to look like this, you can also, again, this is just like a normal function. I can run, hey, if props is muted, so if that's true, return what is it? If is muted, return that off icon, audio off. Else I can return that. I can return the on icon. This will also work. So if I refresh that, I can keep on going. I can destructure this. So if I already know what props are being passed in, I could do const, what is it? Toggle mute is muted. And that's coming from the props. Now I don't need to have this props dot is muted anymore, or props dot toggle mute. See that? Keep refreshing. Everything still works. I can go one step.
On that last part, what you've got highlighted right there, are those the keys or the values?
This part?
Wait, you've got, yeah.
These are the keys, but these are the values of it. So if I console logged is muted, it'll be the value of that. So we got false, true, false, true.
Thanks.
I can even go one step further and destructure them while I pass them in to the method or into the component. So I'm passing the props in here and I'm destructuring them in place. And everything still works. But I like to keep things a little more visible. So this is good enough for me. Any questions?
I got a question between using the if statement version and the previous version where you had the ternary within the source. What's like most used version, or what's the better way to do things where it's clearer?
I don't know if there's like a better way. This is probably a little more easily readable, but probably the and the reason why I'm doing it this way is so the alt tag is a little more accurate because it's an audio off icon. So for what was it called? So if it's got a screen reader on it and it's like reading through what these tags are, it'll read the alt tag and say that that's an audio off versus an audio on. So that's the reason why I have it like this. But if you didn't, if the icon didn't matter, that ternary within the source, I'd probably do. It's more concise. A developer will be able to understand it's not that bad. So notice how I'm using fat arrow functions. Has anybody gotten to the whack-a-mole?
Yeah, we finished it.
Finished it?
Yeah.
So if I had this as just a normal function, and pass that in, let's see what happens when I do that. If I refresh it, well, it still works. All right, never mind. Why does it work? Cool. All right, disregard. Maybe if
I think it's usually an issue with class-based points because you need this pointer and this point will be incorrect.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah. Because, yeah, that's where I was going to say it's probably only in class components. Disregard. We'll cover that in another time. All right. Any questions about state, passing down state as a property, passing down a function that updates a state as a property to a child component, and calling that function in the child component to update the parent component's state?
Yeah, one more question on that.
Yep.
I just want to say, like, we want to try to keep the state at the parent level, like, as much as possible. You almost never want to have state at the lower child components. Like, keep the state at the parent level and pass it down and then modify it that way, like we just did.
I'll say you don't always want to keep state at the top level. Majority of the time you will, but it's okay for individual components to have state and to update that state. As long as it's whatever that data is needed, is confined to that component. So yeah, anyway, so it's okay to have state declared and used inside of a child component, as long as that data is only used inside that child component. If it needs to be used somewhere else within the application, then you should extract it either to the parent component, or you'll find out in the future with context. Or if you're really ambitious, you can use Redux.
Thanks.
So again, if you have two different components that need to access the same data, you want to find the most direct ancestor. So again, you're not going to always nest it in the app.js component. It's just whatever is connected to both children, or like it might be your grandparent or a great grandparent component. Whatever is the most common ancestor or nearest ancestor is the one that should manage data for the children or the grandchildren. Does that kind of make sense?
It makes sense. Thanks.